handling this space stuff. Maybe if you wouldn't mind starting by just letting us know who you are and what you do, and then I shall grill you with all these fabulous things you're working on.
Fantastic. Let's get right on to it. So, to everyone who's watching, hello, good evening, good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Deepika Jeyakodi. I'm a space lawyer because I studied space law and I work in the space industry for the last 10 years now. So I know a little bit about space law, but I'm here to, I guess, talk about what space lawyers in general do. Is there more to it than just the cool factor that you are a space lawyer, and so on.
I mean,
So
I feel like whenever you say space lawyer, I feel like you almost want to have some kind of a bottom third come up and go, space lawyer. It feels like it does feel very sort of superhero like, doesn't it?
what's interesting is that nobody associates genius with law. It's always someone who's doing technical things,
Hmm.
right? Always the school engineer and so on.
Hmm.
And while I was looking through some of your older podcasts and things, I saw that you were actively putting the A in STEM, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, it's a pet peeve of mine because I feel like I one of my big frustrations growing up as a kid was that as soon as people went, oh, actor, that was it. I was never the science was never. It's like, whatever, he's gonna be an actor. He doesn't need to get good marks, and I did the same thing. And I just think it's such a frustrating part of education that people get sort of pigeonholed in this stuff. And I think there is an art to science and a science to art, and I just think I'm glad you picked up on that because that is a big thing for me. And I'm sure the same thing applies to law as well, right? I'm sure there's technical stuff. There's also, it takes a
It
certain amount
does.
of amount of
It does.
creativity.
I think especially if you are dealing with space law, I think apart from the whole legal texts and what to do when you're dealing with treaties and contracts and whatnot, is also understanding the technology and science behind it.
Mm.
Imagine if you were to regulate space mining without knowing anything about how that would work.
Ha! Congress, in other words. It's well, I mean that's the
No
problem.
comments there.
Yeah, it's really the problem. The problem really does come down to it's like how do you find people who have the expertise to
Right.
understand the nuance of this stuff because it's one thing to sort of go like, well, generally what's the but of course law is all about those specifics. I mean, where are we at right now? Maybe you could just walk us through that. I mean, we did have an agreement. It's now beginning to sort of split up into lots of separate perspectives on these
Different
things.
things. So let me see if I can do a quick space law 101.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It's not as new as a lot of people think it to be.
Yeah,
So
I was surprised.
right. So it's I think people or the international community saw that there was a need to bring up a legal framework for regulating space activities after Russia launched Sputnik,
Mm,
because they thought, oh, wait a second, what if this becomes another, arms race,
mm,
but not not on Earth, but in space.
mm, mm,
So effectively, the Outer Space Treaty, which is like the Magna Carta of space, this was a arms control treaty between the US and then USSR.
mm.
So they wanted to prevent the possibility that we could extend wars into space.
Right, right.
That was the origin of the treaty. And what I find interesting is the history of space law making is is super rich in how it came about.
Mm,
So around this time, so if you look at the 50s and the 60s, this was the time when a lot of countries were newly becoming independent from their colonial masters.
mm,
So you find a lot of wording in the Outer Space Treaty, which is not just do's and don'ts of how we behave in space or how we conduct our space activities, but also what it means for us.
mm,
So you would find phrases like space is the province of all mankind or
mm.
human, if you want to go with a non-gendered phrase. And you would find concepts like peaceful purposes, that we use space for peaceful purposes.
Mm.
What that means is a different questions, but you can see that there was a collective ambition and spirit to how we want to be in space.
Mm.
Um, you find phrases where we say, okay, we need to have international cooperation. Activities that we do in space need to have benefit for all of us,
Mm.
irrespective of whether you are a technologically developed country or not.
Mm.
So this is how it started. And of course, it wasn't instant. So Sputnik launches, we realize that we
We
need a legal
panic.
framework.
We all panic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We panic
Yeah.
and we think, hey, we need to do something about this.
Yeah.
And then the United Nations comes up with, they start first with declarations and principles, which evolve into what is the Outer Space Treaty. And the
Mm.
Outer Space Treaty is simply a list of do's and don'ts.
Mm.
Okay, so no nation claiming a part of the moon or part of the space as part of their own.
Mm.
That you don't put nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction in space.
Mm.
That countries take the responsibility and consequently the liability if things go wrong in the
Mm.
activities that they conduct, or activities that are conducted by, let's say, any citizen or an entity within their jurisdiction.
Mm.
So it's essentially a list of these things. Now, as
And are
we
these
evolve,
laws? These are actual laws that can be like prosecuted and stuff, or I mean, how does that?
these are the thing about space law, or the painful part, is that there is no hard enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
you could take a case to the International Court of Justice, for
Mm.
instance,
Mm.
and you have to submit yourself to it.
Mm.
And if you do, you can whatever, let the court adjudicate the case that you put in front of them. But
Right.
there is no consequence if you, I mean, I just said you can't put a nuclear weapon in space. What
Mm.
if tomorrow a country does that?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
you could, I mean, you can think about other consequences in international law. So you could think about economic sanctions. You could,
Mm.
I mean, if doing something wrong affects another country, they could consider evoking self-defense and
Mm.
reciprocity.
Mm.
So these are also things that space lawyers talk about. So what happens? What do we do? Of course, when everything is in peace, what do we do if there's friction?
Mm.
And what do we do in wartime? So
Mm.
these are also things that space lawyers talk about.
But surely, I mean, surely when it comes to that kind of stuff, it's so easy to put it off until there is a conflict, right? That seems to be the way we work. It tends to be we don't tend to be particularly proactive on this stuff. That's why I was so surprised to see that we already had, sort of an agreement on this.
I think yes and no. So the way the UN body works, so there is one of the UN bodies is called a Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space.
Hmm.
So this
Good
is the
name.
body.
That seems to get to the point. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that it gets to the point, you
yeah,
would think.
yeah.
So this committee discusses not just legal things, but also technical topics. So
Mm.
what kind of standards do we need to adopt and so on. And they work under a consensus mechanism,
Mm.
which means everybody has to say okay to for a certain treaty to be accepted,
Right. And
right?
who's a
And
part of that's does that and is that including Russia, including China? Is that are they all a
yes,
part of?
yes. So
Oh, so
it's
it
it's
really is
so the
international.
outer
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
the Outer Space Treaty, when it was first done, I think the key players were the US, the then USSR, and the UK. And of
Right.
course, you had a lot of other countries contributing to it and then becoming signatories.
Mm.
Today, if I'm not wrong, there are about 110, 115 countries
Wow.
who are a part of this agreement,
Wow.
and they all have a seat at the table.
Mm.
There are also international organizations that can join as observers in these proceedings,
Mm.
uh, and they discuss a lot of these issues. But it's just that it's not as quick as you would want it to be.
Right.
Having said It doesn't mean they don't do the work. They do think about every issue that you can think about when it comes
It's
to
almost
space.
like science fiction. You're almost writing science fiction to try to figure out what problems you need to solve.
Exactly, exactly.
That's got to be fascinating.
It is. It is. I
And
mean,
what is a
and
day
it
for you doing this stuff? Sorry, dude, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, no, no. Go on. So my day, I
Yeah.
think it depends. I don't work with treaties and these UN bodies directly because
Mm,
I work with the industry. So
right.
what I do is deal with a complex, or used to deal with a complex web of contracts.
Wow.
So international space law is a bunch of different things,
Mm,
and they have a certain hierarchy, right? So you have these international treaties and principles from the United Nations, and then you have national legislations.
mm,
So the US has an act that talks about how NASA is governed, how do we deal with commercial space launches, what does the FAA do, and things like that.
mm.
And then you have something called soft law, which is a super interesting mechanism as well, which is non-binding, but sort of sets the vision for how things should be.
Right.
So these can be guidelines or best practices and so on. And then you have something that people don't talk about often, but pretty much runs the space industry, which is these contracts.
Right.
So we have a complex set of contracts that can be dealing with anything from procurement, procuring components for different kinds of missions,
Mm.
or looking into, let's say, liability waivers if you were
Yeah, I'm
talking
sure
about
that must be a huge one, right? Who's responsible if something goes
and things
wrong?
like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it depends. My focus was mostly on contracts, dealing with the IP, setting up, let's say, the relationship between different entities in a consortium that's working on certain missions and so on.
Wow. And are any of these have we got to a point where any of these have they come to a court? You know, have they had to come to a court? Has someone made complaints that had to use this stuff yet?
Not to the court. I think some years ago, it was probably the late 1970s.
Mm.
There was a case that was brewing where, if I remember, it was space debris between a
Ah,
Russian and a US satellite that crashes into somewhere in the northwest of Canada.
right.
So
Canada.
then
There you go. Yep.
Exactly. So then Canada raises a claim against Russia for a
Mm.
certain amount of dollars. They do this through diplomatic channels. They come to an agreement, and Russia pays out a certain sum of money for the cleanup. And that was it. I
What
mean,
was
I can
damaged? What
imagine.
was the? Do you get a sense of what it was? Was it damage
I
to
think it was
property or was it?
more environmental damage, so
Yeah.
loss of trees and things. Maybe
Right.
there was property damage, but I don't remember from the top of my head.
That's a whole other thing though too, isn't it? As the environmental side of stuff.
Yeah.
I know we're not allowed to put sort of warheads into space, but we do have nuclear batteries and stuff that people are using.
Hmm.
There was a wonderful, I don't, wonderful and terrifying incident with a moon landing. That apparently there was a Chinese moon landing that failed, and it crashed, but it was carrying tardigrades. It had
I think
tardigrades
it
to
was
study in space, and I thought, oh my gosh, we may have just colonized the moon without even realizing it.
this was a super interesting case again for lawyers. It might be super boring for the others, but as a lawyer, I find this
It
interesting
has tardigrades in
because
it. It's got to be cool.
it
I
has
mean, that's yeah,
tardigrades,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
It was, I think it was Swarm Bees or something along those names. It was a US company
It
that
was a
first,
U.S. company.
it was a US company, but the
Interesting.
launch was done by India. So you have this,
I got it
uh,
totally wrong then. That's why you're the lawyer. Very good. Yeah.
it's still a great
Yeah.
story because so these guys do not get authorization from the FAA, or maybe they ask for more information before they could authorize.
Mm.
They go to India, they procure a launch from them. Of course, India sends the satellite away.
Hmm.
It lands, and weeks later, you find that they put tardigrades. Now
Right.
there are different things that you can look into this. So there's another convention that expands on a principle of liability called the
Mm,
Liability Convention. So
mm,
this is a law that basically deals with, okay, who bears the liability if there is some sort of damage caused in space or on Earth
mm,
because of a certain space activity.
mm.
And there are different circumstances which lead to who can be called a liable party in that
Right,
case.
right.
So, and one of those circumstances is a launching state. So in this case, it's not an Indian company, but
Mm,
India procures the launch. I mean, they procure the launch, they
mm.
put the spacecraft on space. Could they be considered, uh, a
Are they
party who's
liable? Wow.
so what if it was something else instead of tardigrades? Let's
Mm,
assume it was a nuclear bomb.
okay.
Who bears responsibility and the consequent liability? It could be
Mm,
the US or it could be India, it could be the
mm,
company, so it could be different things. So this could have been an interesting case to
yeah.
define, okay, how do you do this? What sort of protection measures do you have?
Mm,
And from an environment perspective, I think it's also different because it was the moon. So the moon has fewer restrictions when it comes to what you can take to the moon.
mm.
So you have something called a COSPAR agency, and they provide guidelines on what sort of missions do you take and what sort of environmental standards do you need to maintain.
Right,
So the
right.
Outer Space Treaty simply says you shouldn't cause any harm. So you basically don't pollute let's say, the celestial bodies or
Mm,
space. You should also try not to bring contamination back into our planet.
right, right,
So it goes both ways.
right.
And depending on where your mission is, whether it's to Mars or to a different asteroid and so on, you have these standards that govern. I mean, there's no law, but this is a good practice where they say this
Mm,
is what we need to do because if you, let's say, you don't want to do things that might change the chemical composition or harm any signs of life that you might find elsewhere. And I'm not
right.
talking about aliens, but it could also just be chemical compounds
Yeah.
that you don't want to disrupt. So,
Yeah, if we
so
find
yeah.
tardigrades on the moon now, do we know that were they there before? Were they there because of a
Don't.
crash? I mean, like it's fascinating, isn't it? There was a Lance, a friend of mine, sent me an article that was was a YouTube video about Carl Sagan's involvement in a investigation into possibly nuking the moon. There was this idea that
Mhm.
they were gonna try sort of showing off they basically wanted an explosion big enough that Russia could see it and be scared, and and they decided against it. But one of the things that I thought was funny about it was that one of their concerns was the scientists obviously seemed very against it from the start. But one of their big pushes was like, if you nuke the moon, we have there's no way to study it. We can't study what it was like before it. We change everything. But when you say we're not allowed to, litter the moon, are we not littering the moon anyways? I mean, if you've got these craft landing and falling over, or just going out of service, I mean, surely that's changing the moon landscape, isn't it? I mean, that's.
I think you can say that there's a lot of littering. So
Mm,
what I mean with the COSPAR regulations are they prescribe standards.
right,
So compared to a lot of, let's say, other sites in space, the moon is less regulated in that sense. It doesn't mean you're allowed to put tardigrades, but it's not as sensitive as, say, another asteroid or Mars or Venus and so
really.
on.
Why that? Why are we not worried about the moon?
I and perhaps a scientist could answer this better, but I understand it's because they've already they already think that you will not find complicated compounds or
Mm.
something.
Or like organic compounds and stuff. Right,
So,
right.
so
Okay.
something that would be so vital that you could disrupt it.
Mm. Oh, okay. All right. So they base.
Again, it also depends on the activity. So I think it makes a difference if you send a rover and the rover, let's say, runs out of life and stays there,
Mm.
which is also littering in some sense,
Yeah.
uh, compared to putting tardigrades or other objects on the moon. So I think there are different criteria for what you do and what you don't.
Mm. Is there any?
And
Are there things that you find yourself thinking of that people don't consider? I mean, do you find yourself going like, "Oh my gosh, we need to worry about this or that or what?" You know, are there sort of points of pain that we should be looking at?
I think that there are different things. I mean, you can t think in different time frames
Mm. Oh,
or
that's true.
different.
Yeah, yeah.
You can think about this in different time frames. I mean, you talk a lot about science fiction, and I don't know if Wall-E counts as science
Oh,
fiction.
yeah, yeah. One of the best, in fact,
One
I
of
would
the
say.
best.
I
And
think
there's
so.
this
Yeah.
there's this and if you remember the part where Wally leaves the planet for the
Mm,
first time.
yeah,
He wades through a bunch of space debris.
yeah, yeah,
So the spacecraft that moves past just has to wade through a bunch of debris.
yeah.
And there's a 2 second, maybe one or 2 second shot where the spacecraft flies past the moon
Mm,
and you see a lot of different objects.
yeah.
And there's one billboard on the moon as well.
Ha! I'm
There's a
waiting for
billboard
that.
which is running an advertisement.
Yeah.
And what's funny is that these discussions have come up where people have thought about, oh, why don't we just start putting up billboards in space?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a prime time slot. And commercially, I think okay, this is super interesting. I mean,
Mm.
it is prime time. It is a prime space and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah. It's the
But
yeah.
then you have to take into account a lot of different things. I mean, apart from the fact that it's an intrusive force-feeding mechanism for
Mm.
advertising, space or let's say celestial bodies like the moon have a lot of cultural significance.
Right. Right.
So you often think about things only from a scientific or a technical perspective,
Mm.
and sometimes we miss these other perspectives.
Mm.
And these can be economic, these can be let's say social, these can be cultural,
Mm.
these can be political. And I think within the industry, sometimes it's quite easy to fall into that trap.
Right. Right. Of
And
just just
I mean,
just advancement for the sake of advancement
yeah,
without thinking about
I
yeah.
mean, it's also simple economics. Let's play this out. Let's say we
Mm.
find an asteroid with abundance of platinum.
Mm.
Platinum is a precious good right now
Right.
because it is not easily available. So let's say you do have a lot of platinum. What
Mm.
does it mean economically if you were to bring it back? Does it
Right.
still have the same value?
Right.
And
Wow.
does it make business sense to do all those activities and then bring it back? Is it still valuable then?
Right. Yeah, it's true. If
So
you suddenly find a planet full that's got a gold core, what does that
yeah.
do to the price of gold on Earth?
Yeah, and how does it play out? I mean,
Mm.
how does it impact? Let's say, okay, let's say the first point is it reduces the price.
Mm.
Okay, so what happens if gold prices reduce globally?
Right.
Does that affect other things? And I think these are things that we need to play out, and it requires a lot of discussion between people from different disciplines
Mm.
and expertise. And I think this happens quite a lot.
Mm.
Uh, and talking about time frames as well, I know some people who are super psyched about humans becoming an interplanetary species.
Right. Right. I'm not so sure
And
about that, but yes.
it's amazing. But today I was biking back from work, and I was thinking about this podcast, and I was trying to reflect, oh, what are the cool things that I like from fiction and
Mm.
art and whatnot. And something that popped in my mind was this poster from NASA. I think it's called. I think what they do is they visualize what space travel in future would look like.
Right, right.
So, and they have these super cool posters. And there's one poster which is a beautiful image. There's a couple in the picture, and it says Earth, where the air is free and breathing is easy.
Ha. Yes. I mean, we do have to keep in mind that as far out as we can go as far as we want. If we can't make it work here, it's unlikely we're going to make it work anywhere else.
Yes,
In,
but think about being in a position
mm,
where you have to pay for air.
yeah. Oh, that's no, that's a, oh my God, I didn't even think of that. Yes. Well, because I remember I'm so old that I remember a time when I laughed at people buying water in bottles.
Right?
And I was like, who would buy water? Like, what the hell? It comes out of a tap. What's the? But it's yeah, absolutely no air. That look, that completely makes sense to me. Now you say that because I mean, it's not an infinite resource. It's weird. The more we the pollute, the harder it is going to be to get. Wow, that is yeah, and that's well, and we're looking at this right now where there's all sorts of concerns over who pays for climate change. You
Right.
know, these more industrial, the earlier industrial countries have caused this issue, and so how do we sort of spread the love around a bit so that everyone can well breathe easy, literally. That is boy, that's a fascinating issue right there. I mean, this is the kind
And
of
and
stuff.
from
You guys are the
and
best science fiction
from
writers ever.
yeah, yeah, and from a lawyer's perspective, I again thinking in long term. Let's say we have a colony, we have to regulate a lot of things, and humans being humans, we will commit some sort of crime.
Right, right.
There
We
might be
will.
some
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
crime. What would constitute penalties? What would constitute punishment? So on Earth, when we are talking about human rights, we are not talking about denial of air and denial of water and
Hmm.
things like that. Could this be something that would come forward? And this is like way ahead,
I hope so.
but these are yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, but
yeah.
these are topics that I think we would at some point start thinking about.
Hmm.
And it's not that strange. I mean, if we spoke about how space law is not that old, but the first, I think is it the first book? Yeah, I think it's the first book on space law, um, is from a guy called Vladimir Mandl from then Czechoslovakia.
Right.
And he wrote a book about the problems of space travel. And he
Hmm.
talks about different legal aspects. And this is from 1930,
Wow.
1932 or 1931.
Yeah.
And he was a prolific writer. He was a renowned lawyer and all that.
Hmm.
But could you imagine how people would have thought this guy was crazy?
Yeah. Yeah.
He was writing about, oh, all of these imaginary problems that we will have someday,
Hmm.
which are relevant today. So maybe 100 years from now, we would be talking about the right to free air.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, well, and it actually, India is a perfect example of that, where there are cities that the air is basically dangerous for what is it? I don't know, days, weeks of a year. I mean, and how do you? I mean, yeah, well, yeah, that is some nihilistic future. Let me ask you this then, because the thing that struck me as a bit worrying was that we had this international space treaty, and then I think it was first America said, you know what? Actually, if you go out there and get it, you can have it. Basically, not so much claim it, but if you can pull it out of the ground or whatever. It's basically drill, baby, drill, right? I mean, it's that and the sense that I got from that was that it initiated an entire space business. I mean, it really kickstarted that. All of a sudden, it made it financially viable. And then, of course, other countries followed suit because of that. But if we've all got our own rules saying that we each get take what we want, that's like a recipe for disaster, isn't it? I mean,
So I don't think it comes out of nowhere. See,
mm,
what people have been doing over the last decades with the Outer Space Treaty is that um, it was established then. There
mm,
have been no amendments, but you interpret it in a certain way. And
right.
until now, I mean, despite, I mean, you hear a lot of people saying, oh, there are either no laws or space is the Wild West,
Mm,
and it's all for the taking. And that's not true.
mm,
This law is still good. It
right.
lays down the principles, but a lot of the behavior rests on what countries are willing to do and
Mm,
not willing to do.
mm,
And I think yes, the US was one of the first to address this topic of space resource utilization
mm,
because there were entities, private entities that were interested in doing that
right.
in the US. And they were looking for some sort of legal certainty to say, hey, can we do this or not?
Right.
So I
Right.
think that part of it is good that
Mm,
there are entities who are looking for, let's say, a framework or where you set the boundaries
right. So
on how
potentially the
you
first person who gets out there who has some success with this can establish a norm for it
exactly
that other people would then.
exactly
Oh, that's
and
interesting. Okay. Yeah.
and the good thing is that this has triggered a lot of discussion. So the
Mm,
US did this with their Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, as they
mm,
call it, in 2015.
okay.
And this was shortly followed by Luxembourg. And I think today you also have the UAE
Yep.
and Japan, if I'm not wrong,
That's right. Yeah.
who talk about these in their national legislations.
Right.
India, interestingly, it doesn't have a national space legislation yet, but in its policy, it says that, oh, yes, if there are entities who want to do this, they would be eligible to extract the resources
Right.
and commercialize it.
Right.
Um, Now, these are different national legislations going back to the UN body, the COPUS.
Mm,
They have now established a working group to look into a more concrete way, a more standardized way in how we can go about doing this.
right.
Of course, this will take a very long time. A lot of things will have to be addressed, and lawyers are known to be obsessed with definitions. And I think definitions are good
I
because
I should have been a
if you
lawyer.
look at
Yeah.
if you look at these different legislations, Luxembourg, for instance, I mean the U.S. one, I think it says the scope of the law is U.S. citizens or entities
Mm,
registered under that. And Luxembourg is more loose with that term. It doesn't talk about citizens at all. It talks about entities that are headquartered in Luxembourg.
right. Right. Okay.
So and then what is a space resource? So I think the UAE talks about or the UAE or the Japan. I'm not sure which one is which, but one talks about non-living things,
Right.
but includes chemical compounds.
Right.
So these are interesting mechanisms, and I think the more this evolves, the more you will find things consolidating and coming into shape as one set of standards.
Mm,
You also find, I mean, I spoke about soft law earlier. So
mm,
another thing that the US has done in parallel is set up these guidelines or principles for how we conduct space activities in a sustainable way within the frame of the Artemis program, and they called
right.
it the Artemis Accords,
Yeah.
which is a bit controversial. I mean, the critics say this is US centric.
Mm,
It doesn't have input from the other signatories. It doesn't involve China and Russia.
mm.
But as of today, I think there are a few over 50 countries that have accepted it.
Well, and Canada's got an astronaut in it as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting because they talk about principles like, oh, we need to have interoperability between systems.
Right.
We can set up safety zones if we engage in these activities. Today, these are only principles. We don't know, we know that, oh, they all accept that there must be interoperability,
Hmm.
but we don't know the details yet. They
Right.
haven't gone down into describing, okay, how do we make interoperable systems? How do we prevent, let's say, a non-signatory from accessing this interoperable system?
Hmm.
On the one hand, we say nobody can appropriate parts of the moon or a celestial body and whatnot. But then we also say we need to set up safety zones. So what does that mean? Would that someday become appropriation and things like that?
Right. Right. There's sorry. I'm gonna go to specifics for a second, just because it was a recent news thing where one of the SpaceX launches exploded, um, and they had to divert a lot of air traffic because of it. Is that, like, in a situation like that? Is that a SpaceX issue, or is that a U.S. government issue? I mean, I mean, who pays to do that?
All of the above,
Oh,
I
really?
would
Oh,
say.
okay. All right. So they share it, right?
So the Outer Space Treaty is essentially between countries.
Hmm.
You don't have private entities like SpaceX be a part of the Outer Space Treaty.
Okay.
But it does say that each country is responsible for regulating the activities of the entities within their country.
Okay.
So
All right.
SpaceX then has to deal with these things with the guidance and authorization of the US government,
Hmm. Wow. So
right?
basically, the
So
looser we can be on that stuff to start, the more innovation there could potentially be, but also the more risk we take.
the more risk, I mean, if you go back, everything is tied to another thing, right?
Right.
And the problem with this is, I mean, of course, there are the standard environmental impact assessments as we know it on what happens to the water, to the land when you do these launches. But when you talk about the space activity itself, the launch,
Hmm.
the liability convention has something called a strict liability if there's any damage that's caused on Earth.
Right.
Right? So in space, let's say two satellites crash. They have something called a fault liability. So you need to figure out who was at fault
Right.
in order to assign responsibility to them, and consequently, they will be liable for something.
Right. Right.
Um, Whereas for launches and things, if there is damage caused on Earth, whether it's to a person or to a property of any kind, then there's strict liability, which means you don't have to say somebody was at fault. You just have to say this was caused by you,
Hmm.
and you're liable for that.
Right. Wow.
So so
It,
then the US government will have to bear responsibility, and they will have to figure out how they will have a mechanism with SpaceX to deal with that responsibility and liability.
right. Boy, that's hard though, because you do. I mean, you need to be very forward thinking to. I mean, I think of, like it was Lord Stanley or whoever it was who decided to build a giant park in
Mhm.
Vancouver, outside of Vancouver, before what, even when it was surrounded by forests, and everyone's like, "What are you, nuts?" But of course, if you don't develop it, now we've got there's a beautiful park, and because of it. But that took some seriously forward thinking and a monetary loss to some extent for him,
Yeah.
I guess, at that time. Um, it's are there areas of this that are of specific interest to you? Is there any, if you were going to sit down, and I know you've already written a book, which we can talk about too, but if you were to sit down and write your book now, what would it be? What would be your, is there a focus in a specific focus on this that you're interested in, or is it a general space law thing?
I think I would talk about let's say the softer part of law.
Mm,
So as a lawyer, I think yes, law is often rules and regulations and principles, but essentially these are things that govern behaviors, right?
mm,
And we need to figure out a way where we make these activities legal and somewhat ethical.
right.
And ethics is, of course, often a moving abstract
Very
thing. What's
much.
ethical
Yeah.
today might not be ethical tomorrow.
Yeah.
But you need to, I mean, there are in the space law community or the international law community, we often talk about these things called confidence building measures or transparency when it comes to things.
Mm.
And yes, you have the freedom to explore and use space, but freedom comes with a certain responsibility.
Right, right.
And I think we need to focus a lot on the responsibility part and what it means to be a responsible actor in space.
Mm.
And it doesn't have to be, conducting anti-satellite tests and grave things like that, but it can also be smaller things like, oh, what does it actually mean to conduct these launches?
Mm.
Uh, yes, we are building satellites. We want to become an interplanetary species, but I think we need to find a way to make the assessment of how does this minimize social harm?
Right.
And how does this let's say, maximize benefits, if we could call it that?
Mm.
I
It,
mean,
I, so boy, that I mean that's a boy that is a big that's I think that's it's almost one of the more difficult things to focus on because you've got to take into account all of the technologies that are and it's changing. So I mean, I love it. It's the this there's a new space story every hour. It seems. I mean, it's a bit like AI at this point, where I feel like there's a new. What do you know about space? Well, that was yesterday. Now today, there's so many different changes going on. Trying to keep track of that's got to be. How do you keep up on this kind of stuff? I mean,
keeping up is one thing, but I think you often have to switch across different timelines, but
mm,
also different levels of depth. So you need to look at the future, but I think I belong to a school of lawyers where I don't think everything needs to be regulated down to the detail.
right.
I
Okay.
think what would work better is if we abide by principles and
Mm,
then offer the flexibility to discuss things, to adapt things as we go,
mm,
while bearing in mind that certain principles are non-negotiable,
right.
maybe,
Right. Right.
right? So, to give you an example, the Outer Space Treaty, it talks about peaceful purposes.
Mm,
And there's no definition of what peaceful purposes mean. So there are some countries where the interpretation is peaceful purpose means no military activity.
right. Right.
Whereas a lot of other countries think, well, peaceful could include military activities as long as you are not
It's
aggressive.
like a defense
So
systems and
now,
stuff.
exactly. And now we've evolved to a point where we say space is militarized. I mean, we would be naive to say that space is not militarized.
Right.
It is militarized.
Mm,
It's still predominantly used for peaceful purposes, I would like to believe.
right.
And uh, the thing that it is not is that it is not weaponized.
Mm,
So if we are thinking about what laws do we make, how do we interpret the existing laws, we need to think about how do we prevent the weaponization of space, because
right.
nobody is going to benefit from a war in space.
Right. And space mines and things. I mean, would just be a
Yeah,
nightmare,
the
wouldn't it? Yeah.
all the biggest actors
Mm,
have, whether you take the US, Russia, China, India, the European Union, they all have assets in space that are critical to their society, to their economy, and so on.
mm,
So nobody benefits from that war, and
mm,
it's not territorially limited where you say, oh, I could damage a satellite without definitely causing damage to another asset in space.
right.
You
Right.
cannot do that. I mean, you leave some things up to luck then.
Mm.
Um, so I think as lawyers, then we need to think about things at these different levels.
What's your biggest concern? I mean, do you have something that you got that you that is like what keeps you up at night about this kind of stuff? Not to
I
be
think
alarmist, but I'd be curious to know
no,
what the
no, no.
ones. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not alarmist, but I go back to what I said. I think not having the input from different voices
Mm,
or having only the dominant voices regulate how
right.
we should conduct space activities is a
Mm.
very big concern for me.
Right. And it's what we did in the past too, isn't it? I mean, we've said we should. This is
Exactly.
something we could
And
learn from because it's always been a very sort of colonial kind of was it colonialism? I guess would be the term. I mean, where we tend to have these one big
yeah.
country takes the lead, and then everyone else has to sort of fall into place. Yeah.
No, whether we are talking about colonization or, deregulation of the industry in terms of, let's say, the time of the Gilded Age,
Mm.
um, um, we have a lot of history that we can learn from.
Right. Yeah.
And what keeps me up at nights is that we probably just disregard those lessons.
It's so frustrating, isn't it? It's like, it's that wonderful saying that he who ignores history, is ignorant of the future type thing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like we've been through exactly this before, but it does feel like there are certainly things that make you do start, and maybe this is an age thing as well. As you get to my geriatric old age, you start seeing patterns where you go like, oh, this is a bit like we didn't see that coming, but we would this time. Nope, afraid not.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, it's there was a like a little TV movie that I saw as a kid that really caught my attention, and it was about a bunch of kids and their dad building a rocket ship on their farm property, and and going off to the moon. And I mean, silly at the time, it was silly and Disney-esque and all the rest of it. But I mean, we're now able to put our own little CubeSats and things up there. You can, for reasonable amounts of money now, you can be a part of this. But where are we at with launches now? Is that something that anyone? I mean, if I wanted to do my own launch, is that legal now everywhere? Or are there places in the world that you could go that they would allow you to just fire up whatever you want type thing?
Well, I don't think you could. You could if you wanted to.
Mm,
I think the best practice, or let's say the common practice, is that you get the authorization from the state.
right. Okay.
Of course, there are different degrees within which you do. So you could have, let's say, school kids doing sounding rockets of a certain category,
Right.
and you don't need an authorization for that.
Right.
So it depends what you're trying to do, where are you going with it, what materials are you using,
Mm.
and so on.
But
Um,
is there an understand? Like, is there a general understanding about space launch? Is
The
that?
the general understanding is that
Mm.
you would procure a launch,
Oh,
a
okay.
reasonable launch, either in the US, in Europe, in India, or where not.
Interesting.
And um, and I think I think there are different ways to do this these days. It's not as restricted as it used to be.
Mm.
The fact that you have the choice between choosing a certain launcher from a certain territory, let's say because they can offer quicker access or cheaper access.
Right.
I think this has already changed a lot from 10 years ago.
Mm.
And this will potentially change in the future when you have, let's say, smaller launchers that are focused at reducing, let's say, the not just the cost, but also the time it takes to launch these
Right.
satellites.
Right.
Smaller launchers that are doing small satellites, CubeSats of a certain category, and so on.
Mm.
And these are happening now.
Well, it's a
So
good
it's
thing too, isn't it? I mean, because you think about like what happened with the astronauts recently with the Boeing. I guess it was an issue with the
yeah,
Boeing, and then SpaceX had to come and get them. I mean, still 9 months
yeah,
stuck in space, but still, that's a very short turnaround given from my history with
exactly.
this stuff. That if there wasn't other private companies out there doing this stuff, it'd still be up there. I mean, it's
Exactly.
no.
Exactly.
It's fascinating. Look, I've oh my god, I almost talked to you for an hour. Can we go to some questions? Do you mind if I
Yes,
just check
yes,
and see
for
what
sure.
what's going on there? See if Agne's got any questions for us. Poor Agne, up at the late at night listening to us chatting on about space law. What time is it there for you?
Same as Agnes,
Oh,
so
you in?
8.
Oh, so you too? Oh my God. Okay, well, all right. So I've got to be very careful then. Make sure that I don't keep you for too long. You let me know if you're getting tired or you want to, you want
It's fine.
to. Okay,
It's
all
fine.
right,
I'm
right.
happy to take some
All right.
questions.
Let me do this then. I will. There we go. Questions. Look at this. Lord Viltor. Wow. Okay. What are the laws in orbit? Is it like being in international waters? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
That's interesting. So, in orbits, I would say the orbits are a specific location,
Mm,
and we have another UN specialized body that deals with how we use orbit. So we have the International Telecommunication Union,
mm,
which assigns, let's say, parking spots for satellites.
mm,
And they assign spectrums or frequency allocations for the satellites to communicate with each other or with the ground stations and so on.
mm,
So the the outer space treaty applies also to orbits,
mm,
but the more technical details, these are governed. I mean, what I just said about the parking spots and the
mm.
communication frequencies and so on, these are managed by the International Telecommunications Union. So
Wow.
they have their own process. So let's say, David, you want to put up 10,000 satellites in space.
I'd love
And
to. Yes, let's say
Lord
that.
Wilter wants
Yeah.
to put up another 5,000. You
Yeah.
would have to make an application to the International Union,
Right.
and they would have a set of guidelines and prescribe a timeline
Right.
um, by when you have to start launching your satellites.
Right.
And if you fail to, I mean, if yours is just a paper satellite, so you file an application but you never launch satellites,
Mm.
then your application goes away. They make room for another
Right.
a party that's filing it.
Right.
So
Right.
this is how it works with the orbits. And you also have laws that deal with what you do in orbit. So if you talk about space debris, for instance,
Mm.
you don't have a hard law, so there's no treaty that governs it, but there are a lot of guidelines and best practices that come from, let's say, some of these UN resolutions or space agency standards, and
Mm.
sometimes even from the industry on what do you do at during the let's say the end of the lifetime of a satellite.
Mm.
Do you bring them down into the atmosphere to burn it up, or do you park them in a what they call a graveyard orbit?
Mm.
Um, who communicates with whom if you have to, let's say, if you have debris coming and you need to move your satellite
Mm.
up or down or left or right and so on. So you have guidelines around these as well. And these are topics that a bunch of lawyers and a lot of other technical experts, um, including the Civil Aviation Organization in Canada,
Oh yeah.
um, that are working on to say, okay, how do we regulate this? How do we
Mm.
manage traffic in space?
Mm.
How do we warn each other if there's danger and so on?
There was a wonderful term that was used in your podcast, which I can't remember now, which is built into the most satellites now have sort of a built-in decrepitude of some sort. That I can't remember what the term was, but it's a wonderful term for basically these satellites that are designed to drop out of
Designed
their
for
orbit.
demise.
What was that?
Well, I think it was you who said that, designed for demise,
Device.
wasn't it?
That's it. That's it. It's
Designed
designed
for
for device.
demise.
No, it was one of the people interviewed in your podcast. You said it.
Okay.
Wonderful term. I thought designed for demise. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is just something that I just don't think it. It seems so weird to me that when we first started, we just put them up there. We had no idea how to get them down again.
No.
I mean, and that's a perspective that I think this is where I love this whole space law side of stuff, where I mean, I think lawyers don't always get the greatest reputation because it always seems about sort of making things more difficult to people. But the reality is here that is that we have to start thinking about this stuff because it's coming. I mean, the Artemis 2 mission, perfect example. We've got people who are, the plan is to have people back on the moon and they
Yeah.
and to have a habitat on the moon. And if we can't agree on who has access to what, I mean, that can be, I mean, I'm assuming Russia's going to want to do the same. I'm assuming China wants to do the same. I mean, and
Indeed.
I don't know how many great landing spots there are on the moon, but and then of course you get the situation, I guess, where we've got, wow. So what? Yeah. What about the orbit of moon? Because what we're talking about putting something up there that's going to be a jumping off point for Mars. This what would the rules on that be like?
And what would I mean, something more technical, what would spectrum allocation on the lunar orbit be like? We are talking about the
Yeah,
orbit here now.
yeah.
But who's going to allocate these things? Who's going to, what if you have common infrastructure on the moon? Can you imagine a time? I mean, we take electricity and water for granted right now,
And
but
air. Yep.
exactly, and
Yep.
air. So imagine you have a service provider who's doing this. So how are they going
Wow.
to regulate it between conflicting countries, maybe?
Wow.
These are things that you could
Monopolies. There's like if you've got a
monopolies. Oh, I
monopoly
love
on
that.
a monopoly on communications. Well, it's funny because
Yeah.
they're testing a type of communication system on the moon with I think it was Blue Ghost is doing that
Okay.
on their lander. So that yeah again that's there's it's it I keep thinking of the ocean because I feel like in a similar way, we haven't explored a lot of the ocean, and we are having these problems. Like, I mean, I think of that ship that was discovered, the old galleon that was discovered off. I can't remember if it's the coast of Brazil or where they're discussing who gets the salvage rights to it. Because and you're like, you think we would have you think we would have some kind of set rules on our own planet and our own oceans at this point, but we don't. You know.
And I mean, this triggers and it makes me go back to the question, is it
Mm.
like the international waters? And in some way it is,
Yeah.
because no one can claim ownership on a certain thing.
Mm.
But at the same time, you do have a law of the sea. You do have
Mm.
a regime that governs how we can extract resources from the seabed.
Right.
So how you allocate rights to the, let's say, to certain territories
Mm.
underneath the waters. And and when we discuss space law, for instance, you do draw parallels to these other regimes,
Mm. It
as
does
we
make
do
sense.
in
Yeah.
Antarctica, as we do in with the law of the seas, and so
Mm.
on. And there are some commonalities. I mean, you cannot apply everything one to one, but
Mm.
there are commonalities that we can draw from, we can learn from, and experiment with.
Mm.
And I think this is where science fiction also, I mean, going on another tangent, is a
We're all
great
about
sand.
tangents here. I refer to it as like we're like a bag of squirrels. I call it because we can go anywhere we want. It's fantastic. Yeah.
No, but I mean, a lot of these things, I think science fiction gives us the room, like, just like a sandbox
Mm.
to experiment with these. How do we do something legally? How do
Mm.
we do something ethically? And I remember in one of our in our first call, I spoke about what was it? For All Mankind,
Right.
the series
Right.
on
Yeah.
Apple. And it's super fascinating because they are on the moon. There's one scene where the astronauts on the moon, they do have weapons. They don't know for sure if the other person is going to hold out a weapon,
Right.
but and just anticipating that this person shoots the astronaut of another country.
Wow.
And and then there are scenes exploring what they do, and then they jump a timeline, and you see that there are there is piracy on
Yeah.
board. There is piracy in the colonies. There are labor union style discussions going
Right.
on, and so on. So
Yeah.
I think they are good experiments to have to think about, oh, how do we regulate this space?
Was that? I wonder if that series was based on a book or not. Because it sounds like one of those things that would be wonderful to watch on television, but also probably great to read as well.
Yeah.
Are there other science fiction? Do you have other science fiction that sort of inspires you on that in that regard? Like about
I think The Expanse was amazing. The
I
Expanse
was gonna say, yeah.
was amazing, also from purely from, again, as a lawyer, from a
Mm.
social
Yeah.
perspective, to see how at some point of time you're not the same people. You're a
Mm.
Martian, you're
Mm.
a Earth person, you're whatever, and you
Mm.
have characteristics that are local to the planet that you're on.
Mm.
And And I think in the first space law book, Vladimir, I think he talks about how eventually we will break out of the legal systems as we know it here.
Mm,
And that could be true. Imagine if you set up a colony and the laws that we know here today are
mm,
not necessarily relevant, or they don't apply
mm,
anymore. So you need to come up with a new system.
mm.
And maybe none of the isms we have, capitalism,
Right.
communism, socialism, whatever, maybe none of that makes sense over there. And you have to come up with something completely new,
Wow, that would be fun to sit down and try to figure out, wouldn't it? Try to figure out
right?
like a moonism of some sort, or a Marxism, or I mean that's it's one of the things that makes me very nervous about sort of billionaires going into space. Is I go like, are we? I mean, there's part of me that goes like, off you go, but there's another part of me that goes, well, so then do we become does that become a corporation? Is it a? I mean, and then as you say, once you've got people living, which The Expanse I think did so well, the idea if you've
Mhm.
got people who are living on the belters and the on Mars, and they all have their own agendas and things that are
Yeah.
important to them, and this idea of being sort of tied to this, it's I mean it's I, it makes you want to read every history book ever made, because I this is very parallel to us sending ships off, the Brits sending ships off to explore and discover lands that there were already people there. So it's yeah, it's oh god, it's fascinating. I'm not sure if we talked about this or not, but there's this wonderful YouTuber called Isaac Arthur, who does
Mhm.
these. Isaac? Do you know his stuff?
Yes, yes, I do.
Oh,
I
you do.
do.
Okay, yeah. Because I would love you guys to team up on a space and space law, because he talks about these wonderful futures with all these amazing things going on, and points out a lot of the potential social, economic aspects of it. But I'd love to get a lawyer's opinion on some of that stuff. It would just be really fun. I'm so
That's
excited that the idea that you, as a lawyer, you are basically a science fiction writer. I think that's I I I
it
would
is.
never have
It
thought of that.
is.
Yeah. Sorry, but there are other people questions. All right, Lance Skimpy G says, if a space monolith, oh boy, was found on the moon, would only countries that have traveled to or interacted with the moon have standing for claim? So if you found something of significance, I mean, this would apply also, I guess, to minerals as well. But the space monolith is kind of fun just because of 2001.
Yeah.
Well, we haven't even touched on alien encounters of any sort, right?
I think I think I'm thinking, because this would make such an interesting moot case. So what
Mm,
something that space lawyers do is we come up with imaginary situations,
right.
and we bring it to a court of real lawyers,
Mm,
including judges from the International Court of Justice, to adjudicate on this case.
right.
Um, and I think the monolith would make would make things very interesting for several reasons. One, because we have the no appropriation rule,
Right.
of course.
Right.
So nobody appropriates anything. But then if you were to treat it as a resource of some kind, so let's
Mm,
say this monolith is granite of some kind,
mm,
or a certain mineral. There is a possibility that a country that has the technological capability to do it claims it as a resource.
mm,
I mean, just early this year, I think there was iSpace Europe, based in Luxembourg.
mm,
They received an authorization from the government for resource utilization. So let's imagine iSpace is there, finds the monolith, and thinks, oh, well, this is a great resource,
mm,
a piece of platinum or granite or whatever that I can use. They could possibly extract it.
mm,
There's no right or wrong answer. So
mm.
I'm just,
But you could literally, yeah. I mean, even if it was some sort of mysterious form, you could chop it up into pieces and sell it for millions of dollars a piece, and
yeah.
that becomes a resource unto itself. Wow, that's interesting.
And another perspective that we haven't touched upon, but a space lawyer based in the US works on, um, is talking about heritage sites on the moon.
Oh,
So
wow.
let's say the area of the first human landing in space.
Mm,
Do we need to give it some sort of international
Mm.
protection
Yeah.
because it's humanity's heritage.
It was the
And
first,
then
yeah,
you
the first
Exactly. And
lander.
then you would have different questions about, oh, what kind of sites or what kind of space objects do we grant heritage status to? So I think there are different questions out there, Lance.
That is but that's fascinating though. The idea that it all seems very new to us, but I mean, the first lunar landing, yeah, I could see that with a little velvet rope around it. You know what I mean? Like, or that is neat because we are creating a new this we're creating history. Well, we're creating a human history on that planet. Um, you know, did you ever see Arrival? Did you ever see the film Arrival?
I did. I loved it.
Because that was an interesting one too. From a I'm assuming from a legal standpoint, where it was yes, it was about the aliens, but it was also just about our response to them, which I thought was
Yeah.
fascinating.
And I think there again, a lawyer, a US lawyer, Andrew Haley,
Mm,
I told this to you, I think he's written on the topic of meta law. So
mm,
basically, how should we behave if we ever encounter extraterrestrial
right,
intelligence
right.
of any kind? And I think that the principle it's kind of like the prime directive in Star Trek
Yeah,
and
yeah,
do
yeah.
not don't do something to others what you wouldn't want for yourself.
Right.
And again, it's a bit far away perhaps from today when we think about it, but people have thought about this.
Mm,
People have certain principles on how we need to
mm.
behave there. Yeah,
Yeah, you don't want some space tourists going up and scooping up. Oh, what's that? And then next thing you know, you've just brought a colony of space tardigrades back to Earth or something. So.
exactly.
Chaos Surveyor. I love people's names on this. So NASA's plan to capture that asteroid worth 700 quintillion. I'm guessing because it is in space, that it wouldn't just belong to the country that captured it. Well, that's the resources thing again, isn't it?
Yes,
As
I
long,
have a lot of this is just me, but I have a lot of issues when I hear billions and trillions
right?
and what
Yeah.
was it?
They say
Quintillion?
700 quintillion. I don't know. I
Quintillions.
don't know if that's legit or not, and I don't know how many zeros that is, but I'm sure someone in chat will
Exactly.
tell me.
No, but let's say hypothetically,
Hmm.
this is an asteroid. It makes we do have the technical capacity to do this, and it makes business sense to bring it
Right.
back.
Right.
Let's assume all of this is in place, then yes, the US or the entity that is doing that action can bring it back to, I mean, owns and can commercialize it or use it any way they want, purely based on the US national space legislation you have
Hmm.
right now and the international, let's say, the opinion that's building up based on okay, what's happening with the Artemis Accords or the UN working groups and so on. So you could say yes, they would own it. Another interesting discussion, again a tangent, is the first article of the Outer Space Treaty. There are two parts to it. And there's one part that talks about the free use and exploration of outer space. So let's say
Right.
we capture the asteroid, you're free to do this, you're authorized by your country to do this. And then the second part is something that says you need to do this for the benefit of all mankind.
Hmm.
And nowhere do we have a definition for what does it mean for it to be
A benefit.
benefiting all of mankind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are a lot of discussions around this. And
Hmm.
one of my favorite space law scholars, Chris Van Eyck, I think he's more a space law historian.
Hmm.
He spoke about how during the negotiation of the treaty, the first world countries, if you could
Hmm.
call it that,
Right.
were the ones who proposed the wording free use and
Yeah. Of course we did. Yes. Yeah.
and the more, let's say, newly independent countries
Hmm.
were the countries that proposed, for the benefit of all mankind. And
Mm.
somehow it beautifully sits together, but
Yeah.
we have to figure out how we do this.
Right.
Whether a company that invests a lot of money developing the technology, puts in a lot of effort capturing this asteroid or a resource on an asteroid and brings it back, whether it's fair to oblige them to share things with others,
Mm.
that's also a question that needs to be addressed.
Right.
But this is what we need to balance, and that's what space law does.
I realize I haven't asked about spaceport, about your work I've lost the name now. What is it called? Spaceport?
Spaceport Sarabhai. So
Saturday. Yeah.
Sarabhai is the founding father of the Indian space program. And not a lot of people know enough about the Indian space program.
Mm.
It's quite old as well. It's from the 60s. We were also a newly independent country,
Right.
and the then leaders of the country, I mean, for them, it was important that if we need to progress as a nation and if we need to, let's say, come out of the trauma that we suffered, we
Mm.
need to be scientifically and technologically capable. We need to be industrially capable.
Mm.
And one of those leaders, not on the political side, but more on the scientific side, was this person called Vikram Sarabhai.
Mm.
And he was inspired by, I think it was the Olympics in Japan.
Right.
And and the US had played a role or something where they were broadcasting the Olympics.
Right.
And he thought, well, what if we could use this this capability
Mm.
for social development?
Mm. Mm.
So the Indian space program was born not like the US or the USSR, based on military capability, but on social and economic development.
Wow.
So they went out to build satellites, conduct experiments, and things that were focusing purely on socioeconomic development. The military part came in later.
Mm. But there
Um,
is a military aspect to this now as well.
there is a military aspect. I think India is one of, let's say, a handful of countries where they have a special unit or a command within their
Mm.
forces that deal with the space
You need
specifically.
to now, though, really, don't you? I mean, it has to. It's definitely a sort of an essential part of defense.
Exactly. Yeah.
But India is also doing incredibly well with their space programs.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
It is.
I keep hearing about these successful landings and orbits, and I mean, there's so much stuff going on there,
Yeah.
which makes
So I think.
makes sense. I mean, yeah.
No, I mean we do have, again, going to the roots of, the space program contributing to socioeconomic development.
Mm.
I think even today, predominantly the focus is on how can we get the benefits of space to the common people.
Right.
So, and we have a vibrant, let's say, private space company culture as well that is booming. There are quite a lot of startups and SMEs that are coming up,
SMEs?
and
What's an SME?
small, medium-sized
Oh, okay,
enterprises.
fine. Okay.
And they're doing fascinating things where they are trying to use space data, combine it with the data that you have available otherwise to help fishing communities
Right.
to with the disaster management or
Yeah, of course.
forest management and things like that.
So Earth
And it's
observation stuff makes sense. Yeah.
exactly, and it's pretty impressive. And Spaceport Sarabhai, the organization that I work with, it's just a collective of space lawyers, but not just space lawyers. There's a space diplomat, one of the
Right.
co-founders, people who have startups of their own,
Mm.
who are robotics experts and so on,
Yeah.
who've come together to just create a space so that we can talk about law and policy and create awareness and shape discussions and so on. And there's quite a lot that's happening. So um, we do different things. So I curate something called the Explainer series. So
Yes,
I
yes, which I've been
do
listening to. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah.
which Right, thank you. Well, I try to get an expert to talk about, for example, the Artemis Accords, or what does it mean to have licensing for satellite
Mm,
spectrum and so on. So just something to explain things. And there's another person who's working on creating policy dialogues with different people. So there are
right.
panel discussions on topical issues. And my favorite part, of course, is looking back at the history. So
Right.
looking back at these scientists or diplomats and so on who worked in the early stages of the Indian space
Mm,
program,
mm,
and how they experienced building a certain mission or
mm,
interacting with these different stakeholders, or what did they think about when they were designing a mission to begin with.
mm,
And it's fascinating to hear that and to draw lessons. And then you think about how we've come a long way, but we still build on the same things that they established.
mm.
Yeah.
It's a great, it's a fantastic website. I mean, I want more explainer series. By the way, there was only I could only find there were only like five or six of them.
Yes, yes, I
Um,
should do more.
oh, sorry. Not that. That's yeah. What are you doing talking to me? You should be doing your own podcast. But yeah, it's just it was it was like it's just it's fascinating to listen to because I think as a sci-fi nerd myself and a bit of a science nerd, there are so many elements of this that come into play, and I think it's actually probably the sense I get is that this is one of the most exciting times to be doing this because you're truly going where no human has gone before because you're trying to you're trying to look ahead. I mean one of my big things is I'm huge on trying to let people know about everyone's parents wants them to be either a doctor or a lawyer or a or a teacher or something, and I feel like the more specific you can get with different things to inspire kids into new areas, the better. And this is just a perfect example. You had a wonderful story about how you first got into this. How your first sort of interest with this came from a little book of some sort.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was, I'm often jealous of people who say, "Oh, I grew up wanting to be a space engineer or a
Mm,
space,"
mm,
and um, that was never the case for me because I don't have a grand story to tell. I grew up like any other person. I think space was more a cultural part for me.
mm,
There was the science element, there was the news about, the first Indian in space.
mm.
My hometown is a place that's very close to the Indian space launch sites,
Oh,
and
cool.
so
Yeah.
you did have that exposure, but it was more cultural. So I
Mm,
wouldn't think of space as a place where, oh, this is a place that I need to conquest. I need
mm,
to do something where, I need to whatever. And then I think when I was in middle school, my dad had a series of books called the Pocket Books on a certain topic. And there was one book called Pocket Law, which had something about air and space law. And I thought, oh, this is quite special.
mm.
And then I'd completely forgotten about it. And I had all sorts of interests. I wanted to make movies
Oh
and,
yeah.
be
Oh.
a
Got a great.
cinematographer.
There's a fantastic film industry in India. That's for sure. Yeah.
So do something like that, but I think it was a bit far away for me.
Mm,
Since you said people want their kids to become an engineer, a lawyer, that
yeah.
was not the case. In
Oh really?
India, either an engineer, a doctor, or a failure. So law was outside.
I went
And I was
failure. I went with actor. Close enough. Yeah.
And I was fairly good at science, but there came a point where in school you had to decide which subjects you focus on before
Yeah.
you do your undergrad. And I said, well, I'm just going to do economics and commerce and business maths and whatnot. And my parents were so disappointed in me because they were like, "Oh, what a waste. I mean, you're good at science and this and that." And then I said, I don't want to learn chemistry and physics if I want to study law.
Right.
So that's how I got into that field. And then I studied, I graduated, I was working for 6, 7 years. And I think in my sixth year, someone said, oh, there's this university in the Netherlands that offers a space law specialization. And I thought, who would go to the Netherlands of all the places to study space law?
Right.
And it was one of the best decisions of my life.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's I mean not just for the university, which is great, which
Mm.
offers a lot of exposure, not just to law from a theoretical aspect, but you get lessons from experts in the field,
Right.
um, also from people who are more on the technical or the engineering
Right.
side as
Right.
well. So that was great. And the Netherlands as a country, I mean, it pulls a lot of weight for its size.
Yeah.
And they have a vibrant space community, as you might
I
have seen
I
from
can't
a
get
lot of
over it.
guests on
Agna
the show.
keeps. I mean, this is Agna is again the reason why we're talking. She's just a. I mean, I'm so impressed with her and the Netherlands for just the resources that and the all the amazing different things that are going on there. That's so. And so you are based. I didn't realize you were based there now. This is home. This is home for you now.
Netherlands is home now. I'm
Yeah.
I'm based in Spain right now, but
Oh,
but
okay.
Netherlands is second home, if you could call
Right,
it that.
right. I cannot wait. I cannot wait to visit. I'm sorry. I got a couple more questions. You okay? You still with us?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
sure, sure.
What is it? This is Count 4491. Not as good a name, I'd have to say. Are there treaties for the moon as well as for the Antarctica? So are there similar treaties? Yeah, what's the is there any similarity there between between space and
So there, I mean, I think during the development of these laws, so there were three legal systems that were evolving. So
mm,
one was the law of the seas, the Antarctic Treaty,
mm,
and space laws, and they were all within a certain time frame. So you would see certain discussions overlapping, and we always learn from each other. I mean, for example, the concept of peaceful use, if you look at it
mm,
from the Antarctic Treaty perspective,
mm.
um, uh, it's clear that you use Antarctica only for scientific purposes.
Right, right.
In space, we made a distinction. We didn't say only scientific purposes. So we
Mm,
have a wider variety of activities and so
mm,
on. There is a moon agreement. It was the last international treaty that was developed. This was in 1979, if I
mm.
remember right. Unfortunately, it's not as popular as the others
Oh, really?
uh, because it had what some countries would call communist principles. Um,
Well, if you ask
and
America, even socialism is communism as well. There's no, yeah, yeah, okay, all right.
so there's a very disputed. I mean, the Moon Agreement is I really like that treaty. A lot
Mm,
of people think it's a waste, it's irrelevant. I still think it's got principles that we can entertain. That you don't necessarily have to accept it,
mm,
but you need to be able to think about those
mm,
principles, right?
mm. Anything in particular
And
that sticks out for you? Any part of it that
I
appeals to
mean,
you?
the most controversial one is a phrase called the common heritage of mankind.
Hmm. Uh,
Okay, so the moon
uh,
is considered the common heritage of mankind.
right.
And what this would mean is basically going into I mean what we discussed, like the benefit sharing, that making
Mm,
it open for everyone. So let's say one country again invests a lot into developing the technology and the capabilities to
mm.
to mine the moon, but then you're asked to share the benefits with the others.
Right, right. That's where the
Or you
communist stuff
say,
comes in.
yeah, and you basically have no incentive to do this. But
Mm,
again, it could be a principle that's worth exploring, to say, okay, where is the friction? I mean, now we see these discussions in the context of environment when we talk about
mm,
sustainability, sustainable practices, or climate change, for instance. We encounter the same frictions, right?
mm,
On who pays for this, or
Right.
who should benefit from somebody else paying into a common fund and things like that.
Hmm.
So the Moon Agreement was, I mean, there are a few countries that signed it. They were adopted by a few others within that group. I think not more than, I think there are 17 or 18 parties to the agreement, but none of them, not one of them is a major spacefaring nation.
Ah.
So it's not the US, it's not China.
Hmm.
You have one interesting situation where Australia
Hmm.
is has signed the Moon Agreement,
Ha.
um, which accepts these principles. And I mean, it says at some point you will want to use and exploit the moon, but at that point of time, you can set up an international, let's say, committee of sorts to decide how you manage this.
Hmm.
So this is the Moon Agreement. So Australia signs that,
Hmm.
and then Australia also signs the Artemis Accords,
Right. Right.
which some legal scholars see as conflicting.
Contradicting
I
each
mean,
other.
they
Yeah.
are both compatible with the principles of the Outer Space Treaty,
Hmm.
but but there are some areas of friction on
Hmm.
specifically the resource utilization and the benefits and so on. So
The moon poses an interesting problem as well because if it does become a jumping off point for us, which obviously it seems logical that's what's going to happen, there are going to be limited resources on the moon as well, like water. If there's or ice or things that are of use to us in creating habitats or refueling or building things. I mean, they're not infinite resources. It's as we know from our own planet. I mean, at some point they'll become more scarce. And then if I mean, if you,
or even prime real estate. I mean, one
that's
of
right. Where do you
the
land? Yeah, yeah.
exactly. Well, as far as my understanding goes, you need to have you need to avoid the lunar night in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say you find an optimal position where you're able to maximize your energy consumption and
Right,
things like that.
right,
Let's say 10 countries have already occupied that, and Vanuatu suddenly wants to go to the moon and cannot access these
right.
spaces.
Because there's a little
How do
strip that's
we
good for what they need. Yeah, yeah.
exactly? So how do we make it equitable then? And
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Sorry, I'm chasing little motes of dust as they go by, not waving at you. All right, next we've got one more question. Let's see, one more question. One more question. All right. Raj Luthra says, when do you think we will see changes to the space law when it comes to mining resources such as asteroids? Do you think we're going to see some changes? And if so,
I think we will probably already
going to have to. Yeah.
in our lifetime
Hmm. I
because
yeah.
right, because we do have the UN working group that's looking into space resource utilization.
Right.
It's not going to be tomorrow, but it could be the day after tomorrow in that sense.
Oh wow. Okay.
As I said, there are different aspects that they need to take into account.
Hmm.
And we will see those, we will definitely see those changes. And you also have things like the Artemis Accords. Again, it's only at the level of principles. There are a lot of things to detail.
Hmm.
But as the technology catches up and the law tries to catch up with it as well, there will be a point when they go both come together,
Hmm.
and we will see hopefully more information on, oh, what is a space resource? How do we set up these safety zones, or how do we share infrastructure? How do we make things interoperable,
Hmm.
and all the consequences that follow it.
Mm. And there's a lot of aspects to something like mining asteroids. Like, we know we can redirect asteroids, so we can now redirect them. It seems to make sense. You redirect them closer to somewhere where we
Yeah.
are, so we can mine them and get the resources from it. But then you have an accident on an asteroid, and it starts raining stuff down on either the moon or Earth. Then there's lots of
Yeah.
different things to think about. So you got to book orbits. So you got to deal with the orbits. You got to deal with, my gosh, there's a lot of stuff. You're
You
going to
need
be
to put up
very,
an
very busy.
Armageddon crew in place.
That's it. That's it. You need a crew to go blow things up.
I think it was early this year. I mean, talking about Armageddon and maybe something in terms of the evolution of laws as well.
Mm,
NASA signed an agreement with the oil and gas company BP, so BP America,
mm,
to collaborate on looking at. I think it was more of a technical exchange
mm.
on the capabilities that they have for asteroid mining and so on.
Huh.
So you see a lot of activities. I mean, right now they are fragmented, but they will come together at some point, and
Mm.
I think this will happen within the next decade.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. That's exciting. I mean, there's just something. I mean, there's something both. I suppose there's definitely sort of an environmental issue, and you think about what we're that we're once again we're chunking taking chunks out of things that have been around for millions of years. But at the same time, there's something very cool about the idea of giant robotic systems pulling things out of an asteroid. Has AI come up into this at all? Do you get into any AI and AI regulation stuff?
There are, I mean, I think several companies are already working on, and this is more from Earth observation, I think.
Right.
This is with my limited technical knowledge, I would say, but there are companies that are thinking about how to become more efficient, where you don't download several whatever bytes of giga, tera, petabytes of data,
Mm-hmm.
but you already have AI process on board satellites
Right.
before you send the data to the ground stations.
Mm.
So you do have these discussions come up, but I don't think it's that mature yet.
Mm.
And my feeling is that the regulatory regime for terrestrial AI will
Mm.
mature, and we will be able to draw parallels to this system
Mm.
for the things that are applicable in space.
Mm. It's weird because the space robotics is kind of ahead of us here. We don't use them in the
Mhm.
same way that, well, maybe they're just not as important. But the idea of like some autonomous vehicle wandering around a planet somewhere at some, we're not going to be able to control it because it takes too long to communicate with it. So it will have to have an intelligence, and that will have to have rules. I mean, it's going to have
Perhaps.
it's that's fascinating. Two more for you. Raj Luthra is back and says, "Have you watched any science and fiction TV series and movies like Stargate and Star Trek, etc.?" You've mentioned a couple of shows
I've
already.
wanted to watch Stargate, but
You
then
don't
when
have
I
to.
was younger, I think my bedtime
Right,
preceded
was yes, very good, very
showtime.
good. I never feel that I want to make it's the Stargate thing is a wonderful way in for me to this stuff, but I certainly don't require it's not required viewing at all.
No,
Did you
but
ever
I
do Star
think
Trek?
again, like I said, it's
Mm,
because science fiction, and for that matter, art and any other sort of
yeah,
literature,
yeah,
um, it's such a sandbox
mm,
that helps you imagine these things and play out situations,
mm,
that they play I would say, a significant role in how they shape some of these discussions.
mm,
I mean, we spoke about timelines and regulating human behavior and human rights and so on.
mm.
And I'm just thinking, I mean, one movie that pops up in my head right now is Equilibrium.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah. That was a
and
fun
it's got
film. I
nothing,
very
it's
surprised.
got nothing to do with space,
Mm,
but the premise of the movie is also some of the discussions you would have with people in the space industry when
mm,
you talk about, let's say we colonize Mars and we are going to put the first, let's say 20 or 50 people on the moon.
mm.
Who do you think should go?
Right,
And Agne can probably vouch for that. Some people in the camp that we went to, they would say, of course, engineers and scientists.
right.
And and I remember someone across the table saying, "But why not a bartender?" And they were
Yeah.
like, "No, but this person and what they do is insignificant to what we will do there."
Wow.
Right. And
Yeah.
then you think about, and then it made me think about, I mean, maybe it's a very loose
Mm,
connection,
mm.
but it made me think about, oh, what kind of people are going to be the first
Yeah.
humans, and what's considered important.
Mm.
And I tend to think, again, more people would focus on the STEM part and not so much on the A part
Yeah, the
of
art part. Yeah.
and you would I mean I'm not convincing anyone to put lawyers in space first, but you would need people who are not just engineers and
Yeah.
scientists,
Yeah.
or maybe there is a good psychological case for why there need to be other people there. And equilibrium was one such thing where, I mean, for those who don't know, we live in a society where I think it's World War III,
Mm.
and we've all concluded that human emotions are the root cause of all evil,
Mm.
which could be true, but
Oh
but
yeah.
then
Well, yeah.
and then the society, everyone is drugged to suppress emotion, and you're not allowed to feel things
Mm.
and have pieces of art or literature or poems or books and whatnot.
Mm.
And that could be a likely situation in a
Mm.
space colony.
Well,
So
and up until now, that's basically what what it's been, isn't it? I mean, it's been scientists, and then well,
yeah.
first off, it was sort of like it was. The first astronauts were basically fighter pilots, right? I mean, they were basically sort of military or ex-military or test pilots. Then we thought, oh, scientists, and then but then we, I mean, but scientists aren't necessarily designed for that environment either. No, it's a fascinating discussion. I would say there's definitely a case for having a lawyer out there if you are if you're on the first base on the moon and you need to discover what moonism is going to be, you do need someone there who can look at it,
Maybe,
So
maybe.
there's who knows, you could be up there. You never know. Or
I don't know if I
you'll be on
want
the
to be up
asteroid
there.
making sure you don't
I
want
want to
to
be on Earth where breathing is
where the breathing
easy and
is free
air is
and
free.
free. That's it. That's it. I need a T-shirt for that. There's one more question here. Has there been any interest internationally on the idea of trying to clean up some of the garbage that humans have left in Earth orbit? And I will extend that to the moon as well. Is there anyone talking about that side of stuff?
Yes, a lot.
Mm.
There are a lot of discussions on that. And it is true that there is no single treaty that is talking about it. Of course, we are
Mm.
talking, I mean, in the Outer Space Treaty, we say there should be no harmful contamination of outer space. So you could consider debris and things some sort of contamination.
Mm.
Um, but over the last decades, 2 decades, I would say a lot of thought, a lot of discussion has gone into how we manage the situation.
Mm.
Um, how do we clean up the mess? How do we not just clean up? How do we repurpose satellites, even for that
Right.
matter? How
Yeah.
do we
Recycle them for
extend their
parts and things. Yeah.
how do we extend their lifetime and so on? And there is something called a space debris guideline. Again, these are best practices. There is no consequence if you don't do something. But I
Mm.
think there is an inherent incentive for um, all space actors these days, that you make space sustainable.
Right.
Sustainable in the sense that
Yeah.
you make sure that it is still accessible, that we
Right.
don't cause contamination in space, because you don't want to have a gravity-like situation
Mm.
where things are colliding with
Yeah.
each other.
So that's the Kessler.
Uh,
Is it the Kessler effect, or
the
where?
Kessler syndrome.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are a lot of principles, let's say soft law, that has come up. The European Space Agency, NASA, they have their own agency standards on how satellites are built, how
Mm.
their lifetime is built, and so on. You have ISO standards as well. I mean, this
Right.
is this is compatible with the agency standards. And you also have things that are coming up from industry to self-regulate.
Right.
So ESA recently had something called a zero debris charter, where again it's more of let's say a
Right.
pledge of sorts that different space actors can do to say, okay, let's be responsible in how we build
Mm.
satellites.
Mm.
Let's be responsible in how we operate them and dispose them at the
Right.
end of life. And you have something called a space sustainability rating, which I think is also an interesting mechanism
Mm,
to sort of award points for, who's more sustainable.
mm,
And maybe there will be, just as we have green investors, maybe you will have green space investors.
mm.
Uh, who are looking into, let's say, encouraging better space practices and so on.
We were talking to
And
Antonio last week, and he was saying that for this is for the European Service Module. It was transported to NASA on one of these environmentally friendly sailboat.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I was like,
yeah,
wow! Like, so they took longer to get there,
yeah.
but it was, and I was so impressed by that because I thought that's forward thinking right there. Yeah,
And
that's.
and there's a lot. It's not just it could be something as small as glue that they use on certain products.
Mm,
I mean, there are different regulations on the materials that you use and so on.
mm,
And people do think about let's say the environmental aspects
mm.
and things. So yes, there is a lot of discussion, not just on debris, but different environmental aspects. There's something about having dark and quiet skies. I
Bit
mean,
late for that,
one
isn't it?
and yeah, but I mean, space is one component of it.
Mm,
We
mm.
are launching again, as I said, the freedom to use and explore comes with a responsibility.
Right,
So
right.
if our actions are affecting, let's say, radio astronomers and so on, how do we take their interests into account and
Mm.
their scientific data that has a lot of value as well? How do we give that the same importance as putting up satellites that have certain commercial or military value and
Mm.
so on?
It
So there
is.
are a lot of discussions on these things.
It is interesting because there's, I mean, like the I keep calling it Skynet, but the Starlink, the sort of that sort of the pearls of light that come by with them, and I always find myself feeling a little bit resentful because I go like, look, I love the technology, I love, but who said you could change our sky? You know what I mean? There's a certain, I don't know what it's silly ownership thing, I guess, or but it is. I'm assuming there was not a lot of debate about that once
I
it's.
I think after they were launched, yes.
Yes, after. That's always
Um,
after. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
After they were launched, yes. The discussion around the dark and quiet skies came
Mm,
about. I mean, space is one component of it. There are a lot of different things.
mm,
The discussion around that came because there's a beautiful image if you Google it where you see there's an image, an astronomy image,
mm.
and you have these lines that are going
Yeah,
across,
yeah, yeah.
and those are the startling things. And I'm not well equipped to understand what it means, but I
Mm,
know it's a disruption
yeah,
to the scientific data that the astronomers are working with.
yeah. It
So
makes
there
Earth
are
observation from Earth very not Earth. Well, observing from Earth more difficult because, of course, the
yeah,
light
yeah.
telescopes are gonna get.
And there are consequences to it. I
Mm,
mean,
mm.
I think one of the things that Starlink, what they did was there was something about, oh, we could use black paint or
And
less
they did end up painting
paint.
a bunch of them. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And then there are also discussions in some technical forums where they say, oh, maybe we could put up we could use the moon as an observatory, as a place of
Mm,
observatory. We
right,
don't have to do it from Earth. Maybe we can do it from the moon.
right.
So there are a variety of discussions from different perspectives.
It'll be interesting to
on
look up at the moon and be able to start if we start building up there, it's going to change that too, isn't it? I mean that's going to be a different.
That's the Wally billboard
Yeah, that's it. It's the
that
Wally
I have in
billboard.
mind.
Yeah,
I
we're getting
probably
the.
don't want a
Yeah,
billboard.
you know, yeah. I'm not sure about the billboards myself. Last question for you before I let you back to your exciting life. How do you get into this? How does someone if someone goes, oh my God, this is for me. I want to get into space law. Are there any advice you got for people, or any places they should go, or resources, or anything?
Definitely. So I would suggest starting off with learning what this is about.
Mm,
Because a space lawyer does different things. They can work with the industry, they can work with different governments. They could be supporting international organizations like an astronomers organization or the one of the UN bodies. They could be in academia, inspiring, let's say, doing more research and inspiring more space lawyers and so on.
Mm.
So there's a wide variety of things. But if you do want to practice space law, you want to get exposure into this, I would suggest starting off with some of these free resources. So Spaceport Sarabhai has one of
Yeah.
this. You have a International Institute of Space Law
Mm.
that puts out a lot of publications, reports, and things. They even have a freely accessible space law project called the Knowledge Constellation.
Oh, wow.
And this is pretty cool because you have a lot of space lawyers coming in to talk about different topics. And these are short notes. So I think these are less than 500 words on a certain topic where you can
Oh,
read about.
cool. Okay.
And if you're more serious about this, I think there are. I mean, you can be a lawyer. You could do a master's or specialization in space law,
Mm.
and there are universities that offer different combinations. So there's aviation and space. There's space and cyber law. There's space and telecommunications and whatnot.
Mm.
So you can choose what you want to go with. Having said that, if you are a lawyer, you don't necessarily have to have a specialization in space law.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
What you need to be is you need to be a good lawyer. So
Hmm.
you need to have a good foundation as a
Right.
lawyer to be able to connect the dots. And then what you need is an understanding of the space industry or
Mm.
the space ecosystem. So how do these agencies work? How do the industries build their projects and so on? And I think the minute you go into the technicalities of that, your lawyer mind will tell you what you want to do. So maybe you want to work on space insurance. Maybe you want to
Mm.
work only on intellectual property rights or on a spectrum licensing and things like that.
Mm. Mm.
There's a lot of things that you can do. But as a lawyer, I would say get started with being a good lawyer
Right.
and then spread your wings out into other things.
Any favorite books on the subject or anything? Any?
There is a easily readable textbook
Mm.
called The Introduction to Space Law.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
I think it's a book you can finish over a week
Really?
or a
Okay.
week.
Right.
You're a voracious reader. And I think that's a very good starting point. It goes into the right level of detail, but it's also easily accessible to people who are not lawyers.
Okay.
So,
Well, thank you so
yeah,
much. I'll try to put together a list of stuff. And if you, and by the way, if there's anything that comes up that that you think of,
I will send you a
yeah, let
list.
me know, and
Yes.
I'll try to keep people posted on it. Deepika, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time. You are unstoppable. It's amazing. You just the amount of information. I feel like I want to go back and watch it now because I've got so many things that I want to sort of follow up on. It's just amazing. How do people get in touch with you, or do they? I mean, is there anywhere in
I would
particular?
say LinkedIn is
Okay,
is probably the best way.
all right. I will put that link in too. Then, yeah.
I might be a bit lazy with that, but I promise I will respond.
You're better than
Just
me. I say, yeah, I'll try. But
no, I will respond on it. So I think LinkedIn is the easy way. But again, once again, David, thank you so much for having me.
a pleasure.
And it really means a lot to have a lawyer. I mean, come have me talk about law and whatnot on this podcast.
Well, and please keep us posted because I cannot I'd love to share your adventures and stuff. And if you ever get the urge to come back and talk about something in particular, you just let us let us know because you have I guarantee you've got a lot of fans now. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience and thank you for your fantastic questions.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you to chat. Thank you to Agne for putting it all together. And I will say, until we geek again, I will say, be brave, be kind, be brilliant, cheerio, and huzzah. See ya.